Black Cedar River was always quiet. Eli had been coming there since he was a kid, ever since his father first put a fishing rod in his hands and taught him how to cast into the slow, dark water. Over the years, he'd grown used to the place. The damp smell of the riverbank, the heavy mist that rolled in after sunset, the way the world seemed to fall silent once the sun disappeared. Fishing wasn't just a hobby for him anymore. It was how he cleared his head, how he escaped the noise of everything else. That night, he arrived a little later than usual. The sky had already gone dark, the fog settling low over the surface, thick enough to blur the outlines of the opposite bank. His lantern cast a weak yellow glow that seemed to float rather than shine. There was no wind, no rustling in the trees, not even the chirp of insects, just the soft hiss of the river moving by. Eli set up near a narrow sandbar where the current slowed to a crawl. It was his favorite spot. He unfolded his old chair, set down a can of beer beside him, and cast his line. An hour passed quietly. He sipped his drink, staring into the fog, half lost in thought. Everything felt calm, almost too calm, until he heard something strange. At first, it was faint, like a ripple or a splash too far away to matter. Then it came again, a sound that didn't belong there. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a fish. It sounded like a voice. Eli froze. It was muffled, distorted by the water, but he could swear it had rhythm, almost like someone whispering under the surface. He leaned closer, frowning, trying to make it out. Then, through the fog and stillness, he heard it again. This time it was clearer. Eli. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his chair. His heart was pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. The voice had come from the river. From beneath it, he waited, listening, but the water went perfectly still again. No sound, no ripples. After a few minutes, he forced himself to laugh. Maybe it was an echo from the bridge a few miles downstream. Sound travels weirdly over water. Maybe he just imagined it. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone had called him. Not to him, but from somewhere deeper. He left early that night, packed up his things and drove home without looking back at the river once. The next evening, he told his friend Rick about it over breakfast at the diner. Rick just smirked and said, "You fish out there long enough, you start hearing the river talking back." Eli didn't laugh. There'd been something in that voice. Something almost familiar. By the time the sun went down again, he was already back on the road. He told himself he was just being curious, just wanted to prove to himself it was nothing. This time, he brought an old tape recorder. The night was colder, the fog thicker, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. He set the recorder down on a rock near the water's edge, switched it on, and sat there waiting. Minutes turned to hours. Nothing but the faint lap of the current and the occasional splash somewhere far away. Then, around midnight, the air seemed to shift. The water went glassy, too still, like it was holding its breath. And then came the sound again. First a single whisper, low and bubbling, then another, and another, hundreds of them. Layered, tangled, echoing from under the surface. Some were crying, some were laughing, some were just breathing, and through it all, one voice kept rising above the rest. Eli. Eli, come closer. He couldn't move, couldn't think. It was like the voices were inside his skull, vibrating through his bones. Then his lantern flickered and went out. Eli grabbed the recorder and ran. He didn't stop until he was back in his truck, miles away from the river. At home, his hands still shaking, he played back the tape for nearly an hour. It was just the sound of running water. Then faintly, just before the recording cut off, a voice barely audible, but there. Eli. Stay, and then silence. He stared at the recorder, unable to breathe, because he remembered something he hadn't realized before. The voice on the tape didn't sound like a stranger. It sounded like his father. Eli didn't sleep that night. The voice on the tape played again and again in his head. Slow, distorted, but unmistakable. It was his father's voice. He hadn't thought about that day in years. The day his father drowned in the same river. He'd been 10 years old. They'd gone fishing together, just like always. His father had stepped out onto a slick rock near the center of the current. The next second, he was gone. They never found his body. For years, Eli told himself the current had carried him downstream, that he was just another name on a police report. But now, hearing that voice whisper from the water, he wasn't so sure anymore. He stared at the tape recorder sitting on the table. By morning, he'd already made up his mind. He was going back. The fog was thicker that night. The moon was a pale blur behind it, barely enough light to see his own hands. Eli parked his truck near the same bend, grabbed his lantern, and made his way to the sandbar. The river looked different now. Colder. Deeper. The slow murmur that used to calm him felt more like breathing. He sat for a while, waiting, trying to steady himself. The air smelled strange, metallic, almost sweet, and beneath the surface, faintly, something moved. Eli clicked on the recorder again. The reel turned, soft and steady. "Dad?" he said into the darkness. His voice trembled. "If that's you, say something." Nothing. The only sound was the quiet lap of the water. He waited. Minutes passed. Then slowly the water began to ripple. Not from wind or current, but from below. A bubble surfaced near the edge. Then another. And another. The river began to churn, softly at first, then harder, like something big was rising. And then he heard it again. Eli. It was closer this time. Deeper. He pointed the lantern toward the sound. For a moment he saw only fog. Then beneath the surface something pale reflected the light. Skin. A hand. Eli froze. The hand reached up through the water, the fingers long, too long, bending backward as if fighting against the pull of the river. Eli. The voice was wet, bubbling. The face that followed the hand broke through the water. Swollen, gray, the eyes milk-white but open, staring straight at him. "Dad," he whispered. It smiled, a slow, impossible smile. "Stay," the thing gurgled. Eli stumbled backward, dropping the lantern. The light hit the sand and went out, plunging everything into black. He could hear splashing, the sound of something dragging itself toward shore. He turned and ran. Branches whipped his face as he tore through the dark toward the truck. His boots slipped in the mud, the river's whispers chasing after him. Hundreds of voices now, calling his name, laughing, pleading. He didn't stop until the headlights of his truck cut through the fog. He slammed the door, shaking, turned the key, and froze. There was water dripping from the steering wheel. The passenger seat was wet. He looked at the dashboard and saw muddy fingerprints across the glove compartment. Then the tape recorder, which he hadn't realized he was still holding, began to play on its own, static, then breathing. Then softly, "You left me there, Eli." He threw it out the window and hit the gas. Didn't look back. The next morning, when the sun rose, Eli's truck was found abandoned near the old bridge. The driver's door was open, keys still in the ignition. A few hours later, local authorities found footprints in the mud leading back down to the riverbank. Only one set went in. None came out. A week later, a fisherman passing through found something caught on his line. Not a fish, a small rusted tape recorder. When he pressed play, all he heard was running water, and faintly beneath it, "Eli, stay." The river had taken a lot of things from our town. Bridges, cars, even a few lives. But the one I never forgot was my grandfather. He disappeared 20 years ago while fishing on the lower stretch of the Merrow River. No one ever found him. No body, no boat, nothing. Just his tackle box washed up a week later, half buried in the reeds. I was 8 then. I remember my mother crying in the kitchen while my father stared at the police report in silence. They said the current must have carried him downstream, maybe out into the lake. But the Merrow wasn't that wide, and my grandfather had been fishing there for decades. He knew that water better than anyone. After he vanished, I stopped going to the river. Just the sound of it made my stomach twist, until this summer. I moved back to my hometown in July after my divorce. Needed some quiet, I guess. My old house sits less than a mile from the same riverbank where my grandfather used to fish. For weeks, I avoided going there, even though I could hear the water at night when the wind shifted. Then, one morning, I woke up to a phone call from a friend who works in local maintenance. His voice was uneasy. "Hey Mark, you might want to come down here," he said. "They pulled an old boat out of the reeds near mile marker 19. It looks like your grandfather's." My stomach dropped. I drove out there within the hour. The road was the same dirt path I remembered from childhood. Narrow, lined with cattails, half eaten by the river on one side. When I saw it, I stopped breathing. The boat was old, wooden, covered in algae and mud. The paint was almost gone, but I could still make out the faded blue letters on the side. Ella May. My grandmother's name. It was my grandfather's. No doubt. The sheriff was there, leaning on his truck. He said they found it lodged against a fallen tree, half sunk in the mud. No sign of human remains, no gear, just the boat. I remember staring at it, at the cracked hull and the empty bench where he used to sit. Then I noticed something odd. A small knife, still stuck in the wooden side near the bow. The metal was rusted, but the handle looked new. Guess someone's been using it recently, the sheriff said. But the way he said it, like he didn't quite believe it himself, sent a chill through me. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that boat, sitting there, dripping, as if it had just come back from a trip it never should have made. At around 2 a.m., I got up, poured a drink, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was heavy, the kind that makes you feel like rain's about to fall. That's when I saw it. A light, faint, flickering, moving slowly along the river. At first I thought it was a flashlight or maybe a lantern from a late fisherman. But as it drifted closer, I could make out the outline of a boat, the same shape, the same size, the Ella May. I could see the lettering faintly in the moonlight, and sitting in it, I swear to God, was a man. He wasn't rowing. He wasn't moving at all, just sitting there, hands on his knees, head bowed. The light came from a lantern beside him, the same kind my grandfather used to carry. I stepped forward, my voice catching in my throat. "Grandpa?" The man didn't react. The boat drifted silently past the edge of my property and disappeared into the fog. By the time I ran to the bank, there was nothing there. No sound of water moving, no ripples, no sign it had ever been there at all. The next morning, I walked back down to where they'd pulled the old boat from. It was gone. The sheriff swore no one had moved it. They'd planned to haul it for inspection the next day, but when the crew showed up, nothing. Just drag marks in the mud, leading down to the water. Like the river had taken it back, and carved into the tree nearby, still wet, were 3 words that hadn't been there before. Not done yet. I didn't tell anyone about the words carved into that tree. Who would believe me anyway? For the next few days, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it all. The boat, the figure, the whispering sound of the river that wouldn't leave my head. But at night, when everything was quiet, I kept hearing water lapping softly against wood, like something floating just outside the window. By the 4th night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a flashlight, my old fishing knife, and a small lantern, and I went down to the river. The fog was thick again, the kind that clings to your skin. I followed the bank toward where they'd found the boat. The mud was soft under my boots, the air heavy and cold. Everything smelled of wet rot. The river itself was silent. No frogs, no crickets, no movement at all. Then, faintly, I heard a sound up ahead, a slow, deliberate creak, like wood shifting on water. I turned off my light and crouched. Through the mist, I saw it. The boat. It was drifting against the current, moving slowly upstream, and sitting in it, head tilted down, was the same figure I'd seen before. The lantern beside him glowed a dull orange, flickering with each ripple. I whispered, "Grandpa?" This time the figure turned. The light caught his face just enough for me to see. It was pale, waterlogged, the eyes milky white and sunk deep into the sockets. But somehow it was still him, the same old fishing hat, the same worn jacket. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but what came out wasn't a voice. It was a gurgle, like air escaping through mud. Then, in that awful bubbling tone, I made out one word: help. Every instinct told me to run, but something held me there. The boat stopped a few feet from shore. The water was black and glassy, and beneath it, I thought I saw shapes moving, pale, twisting, drifting beneath the surface like shadows that weren't attached to anything. My grandfather raised his hand and pointed toward the bow. Something was tied there, a rope trailing down into the water, disappearing into the dark. I stepped closer, drawn forward like I didn't have a choice. The air grew colder. I could see my breath. When I was close enough to touch the edge of the boat, my flashlight flickered and went out completely. The next thing I felt was a hand around my wrist. It was ice cold, wet and strong. I screamed and pulled back, slipping in the mud. For a split second, I saw my grandfather's face again, twisted, pleading. Not evil, not monstrous, just desperate. Then the hand let go, and the boat started to drift backward, slowly swallowed by the fog. I stumbled to my feet and ran. I don't remember much after that. I woke up at home the next morning, soaked to the skin, covered in mud. My boots were gone, my knife was gone, and when I looked out at the river, something was tied to the bank near my porch. It was a rope, the same one I'd seen on the boat. It stretched taut across the surface of the water, disappearing into the current. I called the sheriff again. He came out, took one look, and frowned. "We'll send a diver," he said. They sent two. After half an hour, they pulled the rope free. At the end of it was a rusted anchor, caked in river muck. Entangled around it, half buried in weeds and silt, was a human skeleton. The sheriff went pale. They sent it for testing. The results came back 3 days later. It was my grandfather. They said he must have gotten caught in an underwater snag when he fell in, that the river kept him hidden all those years until the current finally gave him up. But the thing that doesn't make sense, the part I can't explain, is that when they showed me the photos, I saw something hanging from the skeleton's wrist. A strip of cloth, still wet, still dark blue. The same color as the jacket I'd been wearing that night. The jacket I found torn when I woke up. I moved away 2 weeks later. But sometimes, when I can't sleep, I swear I hear it again. The faint creak of wood, the drip of water against the side of a boat. And when I look out the window toward the river, I can almost see it. The LMA, drifting quietly through the mist, and someone in the boat staring back at me. There's this stretch of river about 20 miles outside the town where I live. Calm, quiet, tucked away between the hills. It's where I go when I need to think. No tourists, no campers, just the sound of water sliding past the reeds. I've been fishing there for years, usually from the same little spot on the east bank, right where the old trees bend low over the current. I know that river like the back of my hand, every turn, every shallow, which is why what I saw that morning scared me more than I can explain. It was late September, foggy and cold. I got there around 6 in the morning, parked my truck where the dirt road ends, and hiked down the familiar trail. The mist hung thick over the water, soft and gray, the way it always does before sunrise. But when I stepped out of the trees and looked toward the river, I froze. There was a dock there, a brand new wooden dock. It stretched maybe 20 feet out into the water, built from clean planks that still looked pale and dry, like they'd just been cut. The thing is, there had never been a dock here before. Not once in all my years of coming to this place. No one owns this land. It's public access. If someone had built a dock, I would have noticed, or at least heard about it. I just stood there for a while, trying to make sense of it. It didn't look abandoned either. The wood wasn't warped or soaked. There was even a small rope coiled neatly at the end, as if someone had tied off a boat recently. I remember thinking, maybe some local fisherman built it in secret, but even that didn't feel right. The dock looked wrong. It didn't line up with the shore properly. The boards were uneven, slightly tilted, like it was built over something underneath that wasn't solid ground, and there was a faint, strange smell in the air, metallic and damp, like rust and old water. I unpacked my gear anyway, trying to ignore it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't just nerves. It was heavy, like a presence sitting somewhere behind me, out of view. Every now and then, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing by the trees. At one point, I heard something splash downstream. Not a fish, not a bird. Something heavier. When I turned, there were only ripples spreading across the surface. The fog had grown thicker, curling around the dock like smoke. I thought about leaving, but then I saw something odd near the end of the planks. A small object sitting on the wood, barely visible through the mist. I walked closer. It was a jar. A glass jar, half full of water, sealed with a metal lid. Inside was something dark. A scrap of fabric, maybe? No, hair. It looked like a clump of hair floating in murky water. I nearly dropped it when I realized. That's when I heard the creak. It came from under the dock, slow, rhythmic, like something shifting against the supports below. The boards beneath my feet vibrated slightly. I crouched down, shining my flashlight between the gaps in the planks. Something was moving under there. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a beaver or a turtle, but the longer I watched, the more certain I became that it wasn't. The shape was too large, too human. I could see fingers, pale, slick, curling around one of the beams. Then they pulled. The whole dock groaned, tilting slightly, as if something was trying to drag itself upward from beneath. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my light. The movement stopped. The water stilled. Nothing, just fog and the quiet hum of the current. I backed off the dock, my heart racing. I left the jar where it was and walked quickly toward my truck. I told myself I was imagining things. The fog, the reflection, maybe some driftwood. But when I looked back one last time, I saw something standing at the end of the dock, tall, still, watching. For a moment, I thought I could see the outline of a face, pale, blurred by the mist, staring straight at me. Then I blinked, and it was gone. That night I couldn't sleep. All I could think about was that dock, where it came from, what was beneath it. So the next morning, just after sunrise, I drove back. But when I got there, the dock was gone. All that was left were a few broken planks floating near the shore, and deep in the mud, fresh footprints leading straight into the water. I told myself I wasn't going back. I told myself I'd imagined everything. The jar, the sound under the planks, the pale figure at the end of the dock. But 2 nights later, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound I knew too well. Creak, like old wood shifting in the water. It was faint, but it was coming from the direction of the river. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked out my bedroom window. Through the trees, down past the meadow, I could see the faint reflection of light. A lantern, flickering, and beneath it, the silhouette of a dock. The dock was back. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped into my boots, and headed out. The air was thick and cold, filled with the smell of wet soil and something metallic, like iron. The fog was worse than before. It clung to the ground, curling between the trees, swallowing the world in gray. By the time I reached the river, I could barely see a few feet ahead, but there it was again, stretching out into the current as if it had never disappeared. The boards were slick and dark now, soaked through. A lantern hung from a post near the end, swaying gently, and beside it, a shadow. Someone was standing there. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. The figure didn't move. I stepped onto the dock. The wood groaned under my weight, each step sending small ripples across the water. My flashlight beam trembled as I raised it. The figure was dressed in what looked like waders, old, torn, covered in river muck. Its head hung low, as if it were looking down at the water. "Hey!" I called again, louder this time. It still didn't move. I took another step forward. The dock creaked sharply, and then the figure turned its head. The movement was wrong. Too slow, too deliberate. When the light hit its face, I froze. The eyes were gone. Just dark, hollow sockets filled with water. The skin around the mouth looked bloated and gray, like it had been submerged for a long time. The thing smiled, and then, without a sound, it stepped backward off the dock and sank straight into the river. The lantern blew out. Darkness swallowed everything. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the sound of bubbles rising through the water. Then, from beneath the dock, something began to knock. Once, twice, 3 times, a heavy, deliberate pounding, like fists striking the wood from below. I stumbled back, slipped, and dropped my flashlight. It rolled across the boards, stopping near the edge. And in the beam of its weak light, I saw hands. Pale, waterlogged hands gripping the side of the dock, pulling. Then came another, and another, more hands. Too many, dozens of them, all clawing their way up from the black water, dragging themselves onto the planks. They were silent except for the sound of dripping. Each one moved slowly, crawling forward like something half-drowned but unwilling to stop. I ran. I don't remember how I got back to the truck. I just remember slamming the door, turning the key, and tearing down the dirt road so fast I nearly hit a tree. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I could still see the faint glow of the lantern through the fog, flickering like a dying firefly. And something was standing at the edge of the dock again, watching me go. The next morning I called the sheriff. I didn't tell him everything, just that someone had been trespassing near the river. He went out there with 2 other deputies. They found nothing. No dock, no footprints, no lantern, not even a sign that wood had been dragged through the mud. He said the bank looked untouched. I didn't argue. It's been 3 weeks now. Every night around the same time. I still hear it, faintly, from down by the water. That soft, rhythmic creak of wood shifting in the current. I tried recording it once, but the audio came back empty, just static. And this morning when I walked out to my porch, there was something waiting by my door. A jar. Same as before. Half full of river water, sealed tight. Inside, tangled in the murky swirl, was something that looked like a strip of wet cloth. I recognized the pattern. It was from my shirt, the one I wore the night I went back. Sometimes when I dream, I see the dock again. Standing tall in the fog, waiting, and beneath it, in the dark water, something shifts and rises. It's building itself again, piece by piece, and when it's done, I think it's coming for me.